Today is Wednesday, Tes Nissen, Tovshin Ayin Gimel. I believe today, in fact, is the day that the Rebbe's father, Reb Leivik, was taken away to prison. In 1934, was it? I'll call upon him way back when. We are in Teres Menachem Sefer Maamorim, Tovshin Yud Aleph, Tovshin Yud Beis. We're about to begin a brand new Maamar. Yom Beis the Chag Shavuos, Tovshin Yud Aleph, page Tzadik Aleph. Dibur Maamar Alpayim Shana. Okay, we're going to go through this. We're going to say the Pirush HaMilas to the best of our ability. Yeah? We'll try to understand, to get our head around what the Rebbe is saying here in the beginning. And hopefully we'll get into the Maamar. Alpayim Shana Kodma Torah Libriyasa Shalaylam. Good morning. The Torah preceded the creation of the world by 2,000 years. It's a medrash. Shene'amar, as it says in the pasuk in Mishlei, pasuk says, "Vo'ehye etzlei amoin, vo'ehye sha'ashuim yom yom." I was a nursling beside him, and I was his delight every day. This is the simple taich of the pasuk. This is a reference to the Torah. Two levels in Torah. In fact, later on the Rebbe brings that as the pasuk continues, the pasuk mentions other levels of Torah. I'll just read you the two psukim in Mishlei. It's in chapter 8, pasuk Lamed and Lamed Aleph 30 and 31. I was a nursling beside him. That's level number 1, description number 1. And I was his delight every day. Misachek is the fun of Bechol Eis, playing before him at all times. Misachek is B'Sevel Artze, playing in his habitable world. Playing in the habitable world of his earth. And the next part of the pasuk, V'Shashuai es b'nei Adam, and having my delights with the children of man. These are the two psukim in Mishlei. But this pasuk, the first one, mentions V'ehye sha'ashuyim yom yom. I was his delight every day. But the phrase the pasuk uses is yom yom. The Medrash takes this as a reference to 2 days. 2 times yom. V'yom yishal HaKadosh Baruch Hu elef shana. And we know that Hashem's day is 1,000 years. You know the famous joke with the chap that says to Hashem, "What's the big deal for you to give me wealth? Is there a difference for you 1 pound or £1,000,000 or £1 billion? It's completely meaningless to you. Help me, grant my wish." He says, "Fine. Just wait a minute." So, Yom Yishal HaKadosh Baruch Hu elef shana. The day of the Eibishter is 1,000 years.
I thought it was a joke.
Yeah. It is, yeah, because he said, wait a year. Chas v'shalom. Anyway. So, B'meila, Alpayim Shana Kodma Torah. The Torah preceded the world, the creation of the world by 2,000 years. So my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, points out that we need to understand what is this idea that the Torah preceded the creation of the world by 2,000 years? What's the problem? Because indeed the entire concept of time is also a new creation, which was innovated and created in a form of yesh me'ayin, ex nihilo, something from nothing, when the world was created. In other words, time did not exist before the creation of the world. It was created at the time of creation. Just like the general creation. created something from nothing ex nihilo. Im kain, so if that's the case, mahu emre, what is the meaning of this expression of our sages saying in the Medrash? Alpayim Shana kadma Torah, the B'riyas shel Olam, that the Torah preceded the creation of the world by 2,000 years. There was no concept of time before creation. So what does that mean? Ubehekrim. So the Rebbe prefaces this. Shematzinu. You weren't here when I made the Hakdama, the introduction. I'm going to read the Rebbe's words and teach them. Okay? And then we can discuss, we can think, and so on and so forth. We find Gam Besfarim Kadmoinim, also in early books, Shehikshu Maamar Alpayim, they also ask, in the earlier Sfarim, they also ask a question on this saying of the Chazal. What is the relevance, what's the meaning of the concept of 2,000 years before the creation of the world? What was their problem? What was their issue? They say, the measurement of time is through the luminaries, the stars, the planets, and so on and so forth. That's how we measure time. As it says in the Pasuk in Bereshis, that when Hashem created the sun and the moon and the stars, it says that Hashem said, they should be as signs, and for times, and for years, and for days, and years. So in other words, time is related to, the measurement of time is related to the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets. So their question is, what is the meaning of time, or 2,000 years, before the luminaries were created? It seems that we need all of them in order to have in order to be able to measure time. What's the answer that he gave? That the intention of our sages when they said 2,000 years, it means according to the measurement of time as we know it now. Which means, if we would be able to imagine that there would be luminaries then, when? Before the creation, which are the tools through which time is measured. Then the measurement of this time would be like 2,000 years as we know it now. But obviously we're not talking about time as we know it now, because the luminaries didn't exist. That's what they answer. Says the Rebbe Omnam, however, what did you answer me? You're answering me that all that was lacking was the tools with which to measure time. Right? Because they didn't exist. Says the Rebbe, however, but in truth, the question is even deeper. Not only concerning the tools with which time is measured, but rather concerning time itself. What is the idea of time? Time is change. The change from past to the present to the future. That's the idea of time. This idea of change, past, present, and future, this is only relevant and possible when there is the existence of creatures, of things to measure, of things that change. Then there is this concept of change. There is the concept of change, and there is what changes. But before the world was created, since there was no existence at all, and therefore automatically the entire concept of change also didn't exist. If that's the case, what is this concept of time of 2,000 years? The whole idea of time is the concept of change, past, present, and future. If there's nothing to change, then there's no time. Not that there's no tools with which to measure time. There is no time. V'haina. So the Rebbe explains this. Sheheder hashinuyim shu inyan hanitzchi shu be'efen shima yesi begidre azman mikol makemenim azman pel bechalishus klal. Over here the Rebbe is pointing out that there is this idea of lack of change, or to say it in a more positive way, eternity. Eternity exists also within the confines of time. In other words, within the world as we know it, where there is change, where we have the luminaries, where we have creation, which is subject to change, right? It's built in within within existence. We find this concept of eternity, right? So, in other words, not necessarily is eternity applicable where time isn't applicable, or only where change isn't applicable. No, you can have eternity also within the confines of time. For example, let's talk about not time. Let's talk about space. Referring back to that Gemara in Megillah, Makam ha'aron eina min hamida. The place of the aron was not part of the measurement. So it doesn't mean that space was suspended. Space was there, but it was the existence of beyond space within space. That's why it was beyond measure. So similarly, time, you could be in a realm where time, the rules of time apply, and you have eternity. For example, this relates to what we discussed yesterday after the Shiur about Ein Sof, right? There is an expression, Kol kadmein hu nitzchi, v'lei kol nitzchi hu kadmein. Every kadmein is eternal, and not every thing that's eternal is a kadmein. Kadmein means something that existed always, like Hashem. God always existed, so He's eternal. So in other words, if there is no beginning, there is no end. But if there is a beginning, there could still be no end. For example, Ein Sof. There was a time when Hashem decided to emanate, to cause Ein Sof to come forth from Him. But Ein is Ein Sof. It's not end. So right? So therefore, you can have the concept of eternity within the confines of the limited, right? Of where there is a beginning, which means that there's a starting point. Similarly, when we talk about Welt, we could have, as it says concerning, for instance, the Mishkan. It says, "Ma'aseh yedei Moshe nitzchim." The work of Moshe's hands is eternal. The Mishkan exists someplace hidden and so on and so forth. It's eternal. Why? Because within the physical objects that Moshe Rabbeinu made or handled was infused a level which is beyond time, right? From Ein Sof, and therefore they exist forever, right? So the Rebbe says like this: Heder hashinuyim, lack of change, non-change, shehu inyan hanitzchis. Another way of saying it is eternity. It's in such a way that although it is within the confines of time, Mikol Makim, the Rebbe is just explaining what does eternity mean. It's within the confines of time, but nevertheless, Ein Azman Peil Bechalishus Klal. Time does not cause it to weaken. It remains intact, just as it was at the very beginning. Moving from this, we understand. From this, we understand that just like time doesn't affect it to the negative, that it doesn't cause it to weaken, conversely, it also has no effect to its benefit. It doesn't cause it to become better or stronger. It's nitzchi, it's eternal. It just remains the way it is without any change. If that's the case, when we talk about eternity, it makes absolutely no difference if it is 2,000 years or 1,000 years or 4,000 years or 6,000 years. Right? This is when we talk about even within the confines of time. So in other words, when we say eternity, eternity means that time has no effect on it whatsoever. Not to the negative. Usually we say it doesn't diminish, but it also doesn't increase. So if that's the case, right? And we're talking about what? Before creation. When, as mentioned before, time didn't exist, or let's put it this way. If there was time, it was eternal. So what's the meaning of 2,000 years? What is the meaning of 2,000 years? It seems to have no meaning whatsoever.
You've got a sort of problem between 500 years between the heavens.
No, over there you're talking about distance. Mahalach tak kufshala. The distance between the heavens is a 500. That's a form of measurement of space, so to speak. But also over there, you're right.
Using a terminology of time to measure space.
Correct, but well, over there you could say that you're talking about after creation, and even though you're not using, even though there's like for example, there's the concept of light years, right? A form of measurement.
Yeah.
But also over there, obviously, we're talking about. I don't know. I don't know how you measure. I'm not an astronomer, so I don't know what the measurement is between one of the Galgalim and the other, right? Between the atmosphere and the stratosphere, etc., right? However, over there also we're talking about obviously madregas. We're just going to get into that. We're obviously talking about notional ideas here, which have concepts of time, concepts of space. But getting back to the question over here, so in other words, the Rebbe asks the question even more. It's not just a matter that what? That there wasn't with what to measure time. The whole concept of time is in question. So what's the meaning of 2,000? The word 2,000 years before creation, that expression seems to have no meaning. So what are they answering? What are they answering? That although we're talking about something which is eternal, which doesn't change by time, and as the Rebbe said, not to the negative and not to the positive. Nevertheless, since he finds this exists within a realm where time exists, which means it means that it has some relationship to other things, other entities that are within the confines of time. Therefore, relative to the other things, we relate this concept of time. Not to it, but relative to other things that are within its realm. For example, using the mashal, the analogy of Makim Ha'aron Eina Min Amida. What's the meaning of saying that the space of the Aron was not part of the measurement? Relative to what? Relative to space. So it existed within space, within measurement, and it was beyond measurement. Similarly, when you say the concept of eternity, when you speak about a realm where there are some things which are not eternal, which are measurable by time, right? Then you could say this is eternal. Even though to it, time is obviously not related and not meaningful because it exists equally earlier and later. Says the Rebbe, but this is not enough. But in truth, the question is even deeper. Why? Time itself is a creation. Over here you're talking alt is fine and good. You're talking about, okay, the time doesn't relate to it relates to other things, and relative to the other things you say this is eternal and there's no change and so on and so forth. But the Rebbe says here we're talking about what? Time when? Before it was created, because time itself is a new creation, which was created and was innovated, as the Rebbe mentioned earlier, b'derech yesh me'ayin, in a way of ex nihilo. In other words, it didn't exist before. Just like space is a new existence, a new entity that didn't exist before, kach gam hazman, so to time, hu mechudesh shelei hayu kain b'riyasa, is something new which didn't exist before it was created. Because as we know, time and space are related to one another. What defines our physical realm? Time and space. So they're connected to one another. So just like space didn't exist before it was created, time didn't exist before it was created. Well, according to this, it's very difficult to understand what is the meaning of this Maamar Chazal, this saying of our Chachamim, that the Torah existed 2,000 years before the world was created. Before the world was created, there was no existence, which means there was no space, which means there was no time, which means that the word Alpayim Shana, 2,000 years, seems not to make any sense whatsoever before the world was created, because the concept didn't exist.
I get the sense of eternity, but when you say no space, that's very difficult.
Or no time. That's what the Rebbe says over here. Eternity is shaykh to say when, it makes sense to say eternity, when there is time. And this is eternal. This is not eternal. This comes to an end. This is eternal. But if time doesn't exist at all,
no space,
no time, Eternity doesn't seem to make any sense.
Hard to get a sense of no space.
Huh?
Hard to get a sense
Of no space,
no
yeah,
space.
yeah. So this is the background. Obviously, if you want to delve deeper into this, of course, according among the philosophers, there's a discussion: what is time? Is time something fixed? Is time something movable? There are all sorts of terminology. I'm not qualified to speak about it, but I'm sure you can look into the matter further. There are different types of time. The Rebbe, for example, talks about Shabbos. There's a sikh of the Rebbe Chelik Zayin, which is brought before in the footnotes, where the Rebbe talks about Shabbos. Actually a sikh of Shabbos HaGodl in volume 17 of the Sikhs, where the Rebbe brings from the Magid. The time is a mechudesh. Time is a new innovation. Is a created thing. And the Rebbe explains. Good morning. The Rebbe explains that in creation, in the first 6 days of creation, the time of each day needed to be created. After creation, it's a repeat of the previous ones, but each day had its own inyan, as it were, certainly Kabbalistically, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes. So that had to be created every single day. It's not just that, okay, once he created day one, and the sun Erev and Baker, automatically day two, it was like that. No, that's why it says every day, Vayehi Erev, Vayehi Baker, each and every day, because it was each day was created as he went along. So with this, the Rebbe explains that the Gemara says when came Shabbos, Ma haya ha'olam chaser, what was the world missing? Menucha, rest. Ba Shabbos, ba menucha. Shabbos came, rest came. So the Rebbe asks, but it's not only the world was missing Menucha, the day of Shabbos needed to be created. The time of Shabbos needed to be created. Just like every day, Vahi Erev, Vahi Boker, right? So the Rebbe explains that the time of Shabbos, from its inception, from its creation, is innately and essentially different from every other day. It's a different type of time. The time is a Menucha time. It's not that it's time, and on this day we rest. The time itself was created with Menucha. In other words, it's a different type of time. Not all time is equal. The Rebbe goes in also, there's differences in halacha, etc., etc. Beautiful, beautiful sikha. But obviously it puts the whole concept of this, the whole idea of time into a different perspective. There's a Sunday time, and there's a Shabbat, and then there's Shabbos time. Shabbos time is the muhus. The essence of the time of Shabbos is essentially different than the time of the rest of the week.